Alright, what's up guys? Mr. Land here. Today we're going to be introducing and looking at the first couple of chapters of Frederick Douglass, An American Slave, written by Frederick Douglass himself. You may be reading a copy of this like this, or you may be reading it through some of the links online. Either way, the chapter should be very similar. So I was struck in reading the first couple of chapters of this book, and there's not really much use in giving biography of Frederick Douglass himself because that's really what the book is about. And one of the things that you see right off the bat is that Frederick Douglass doesn't know how old he is, and he really is upset about his lack of knowledge of who his who his dad was, his lack of knowledge of how old he was, and just a real lack of knowledge that he had as a kid. And that's one of the things he talks about. He also gets into his life as a slave, growing up, a couple different masters that that own him in these first couple of chapters that we see. And there's this passage right at the end of this that really struck me, and it's him talking about, in the midst of all of this, the singing that the African American slaves are participating in. And he says this, of this constant singing of hymns and songs. He says, "I did not, when a slave, understand the deep meaning of those rude and apparently incoherent songs. I was myself within the circle, so that I neither saw nor heard as those without might see and hear. They told a tale of woe, which was then altogether beyond my feeble comprehension. They were tones loud, long, and deep. They breathed the prayer and complaint of souls boiling over with the bitterest anguish. Every tone was a testimony against slavery and a prayer to God for deliverance from chains." And then he says right over at the very end of the paragraph, just before the finish, he says, "I've been utterly astonished since I came to the North to find persons who could speak of the singing among slaves as evidence for their contentment and happiness. It is impossible to conceive of a greater mistake. Slaves sing most when they are most unhappy. The songs of the slave represent the sorrows of his heart, and he is relieved by them only as an aching heart is relieved by its tears." And I thought that there was some similarities with this passage and the music of the African American community today, which is often criticized by mostly white media in a lot of places as being overly negative and concentrating on too much about the plights of modern society, when there's a long-standing tradition among the African American community. It's one of the only ways that they were able to express themselves in this kind of a way. And we see that all the way back in this early couple of chapters from Frederick Douglass. And so that was interesting to me. A couple of other points of interest, the fact that he'd only seen his mother a few times. She had to walk 12 miles to come and visit him. Some of these things, the descriptions of the abuse at the hands of these harsh slave masters, it seems almost impossible for us to understand and comprehend, and yet these were the realities for many of these African Americans who were in slavery and in bondage. And so that's what we're going to talk about this time. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to read those first two chapters. If not, make sure that you read those and then answer the questions.